Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is 10:56 on a Tuesday morning, November 11th. So hope everyone's doing good. Thanksgiving is coming up pretty soon. So yeah, I guess had a really fun show last past weekend with Quantum, and we played. We had some sound problems in the beginning, but felt like a lot of the times with gigs, and there's a lot of times like when we play gigs where we run sound ourselves, and then a lot of the times too where you're subject to the sound people, and that can be pretty dicey. Well, in general, working as a working live band, there's all these variables that are in your control, but then there's a lot of things you can't really control. So that happens of where I'm a pretty firm believer in trying to be as ready as possible, trying to be as rehearsed and as prepared as possible, because the gig that itself could be um, could always be a potential you know disaster, because there's always all these other factors, like a lot of the times, like the energy of the room can kind of determine the vibe, like how a band plays, or the mood. It sets a certain kind of mood. That can really be a big factor. And there's like two schools of thought a lot of the times of where you'll see bands that will kind of emit this energy that's really powerful and kind of contagious, and they kind of generate that vibe. And then other bands, other artists always kind of like really read the crowd or the vibe in the room and play off of that, and then it comes from there as opposed to the other way around. And I believe that, like, I've seen a lot of bands over the years where there might not be, maybe a big crowd or a big audience, and yet they're so good, they just kind of like put on this show like you know it's their last show. They just have this energy. And then the other side of the coin too, of where a band will just kind of you know play off of what's ever going on in the room, and they'll react to that, and that will like cause, for good or bad, that will kind of like shift the mood, um, or set the tone of what's going on. And I guess for me, it's like it's both. It's a little bit of both. Like, I definitely think it's like um, this whole thing around. I want to try to emit some energy, or try to put things out there and kind of establish a mood, especially like with what we do with Quantum, which is much more kind of ambient based, obviously very much influenced by, well, mainly films and soundtracks, and just kind of creating a vibe and kind of going with it. But I definitely, for me, it's a little bit of both. Like, I definitely will um try to play off of the energy of what's kind of going on, but yet I'm trying to establish something, and you can't really force things because it's got to be natural. And like, and it is for what it's worth, but like Friday when we played at Hey Sailor, we played at kind of the tail. Well, we were the last band, and there were four bands total. Some really great bands played, and around the bill. And but most of the stuff that played, that was going on earlier in the night, was like pretty high energy kind of punk rock stuff with like a little bit of like indie edge or shoegaze edge to it. Not really. There was nothing else, really electronic based. We were the only group kind of doing that kind of thing, and it was pretty high energy. Pretty loud, pretty rocking the whole night. And it's interesting because there's a lot of times, when you do shows, and when we've done shows where sometimes where we've had shows and it might just be us, and we used to play a lot of gigs in the past, where we would play a long set, sometimes 2 or 3 hours. And So we're it's kind of just up to us to kind of build the vibe and to try to like curate something, or and vice versa, try to like really read the room. So and in some ways that's a little, it's more work obviously, but in some ways it's a little bit more fun because you can kind of like interject different things, different feels or whatever. And so and then typically too, if what happens if we're on a bill, if Quantum is on a bill with a bunch of other bands or especially other electronic artists, and we, if we're on the bill with a bunch of bands, we have these like shorter sets. So usually if like the group before us or right after us is kind of high energy, we'll, try to like keep that momentum going or try to establish it and try to like keep the energy high to keep that kind of interest going and the momentum that's kind of building, hopefully in the audience. That's typically what ends up happening. And so, we're playing a set with a bunch of other groups. Sometimes we'll play, maybe our more, we'll play a little bit of the ambient, more mellow stuff, but we'll typically try to play more high energy music. And so, but this past Friday was different because I've been writing a lot of new music. I've been listening to tons of Autechre, my favorite band, of course, and I've been listening to a lot of live recordings from them. I just got a chance to see them, and so, and as well as other music. But I've been writing a lot of music lately, which has been really fun. And some of the tracks that we've been writing have definitely been really influenced by Autechre. Definitely more ambient, kind of atmospheric kind of things. So it was interesting because we played Friday and all the bands before us were like, super high energy, and it was like pretty loud guitar, loud drums, and it was the whole kind of vibe. And typically in the past, we would like try to keep that energy going, in relation to what we try to do as a band. But I decided, why don't we do something totally different and just play, you know, some real kind of more atmospheric or ambient kind of based tracks, and to try some new material. So it was kind of an experiment, and I think it went pretty good. But we decided to like do something totally different and give a big variety, because sometimes it's really cool. Like when you have a variety. I mean, if you go to a music festival, you don't want to hear all heavy music all night. It's night. I mean, it can be fun, but you want to, I think it's cooler when you have interspersed within that, lineup. There's something that's really different and just gives your ears a break, or just changes the mood, breaks up the monotony. Because sometimes there can be a lot of monotony. So that was one thing we did, and I thought it was pretty fun. And it was a combination of, we did a lot of improv, but then there were like one and a half tracks that are songs, but we really kind of improvised. But so you just never know, And we had some pretty bad sound issues in the beginning of our set. The mix was pretty rough on stage, but we kind of adjusted to it. So it's always, it's all a work in progress, but it's really about trying to take a chance sometimes, trying to bring some variety, and not necessarily always have to play it safe. I mean, you always run that risk, because if you decide to kind of like, if you have a little bit of a plan and then suddenly you're like, I'm going to throw out that plan, then that could be a disaster. But then there's sometimes you might discover something that's actually pretty cool, and you can get your bearings, and it could be a really cool experience. And there's an obvious, kind of being in that, on that middle road path, if you want to call it that. There's an element of danger. So, but I kind of like that, and I'm not afraid. I guess I'm not afraid to totally fail, because I have, and it's all work in progress. So yeah, it's cool. But anyway, this weekend we have some shows I have a show with Osmia coming up on Friday. I've it's just luck. It's just funny how it worked out. Luck be have it, I guess. Um, but I have like two more shows at Hey Sailor this week, and we played there Friday, and then we have a show with Osmia on Friday with this really amazing band, probably the best band I've ever seen at Hey Sailor, called Cushing. Absolutely incredible band. Please come if you're around. 7 o'clock this Friday. Amazing band. So I'm really excited to see those guys play and to share the bill. We'll be doing an Osmia set. And then on Saturday, I'm going to be filling in for my buddy Sam, who plays in this really killer local cover band called Very Greasy. And we're doing a fundraiser at Hey Sailor, and we're only playing like an hour set. So it'll be fun. But anyway, I wanted to get to these two videos, or and this one video in particular, but again, I've been kind of got sidetracked, and I kind of been doing a lot of other coverage, a lot of other videos. I've been doing a lot of music videos. I've been doing lots of reviews of Autechre albums and a lot of live stuff. So I've been, mixing things up along with movie reviews, of course. I just uploaded my kind of full review, my reaction to the new Predator Badlands movie. So check that out. That was a kind of a weird experience. Good, but weird. A movie I would suggest for people to see. And it definitely had these. I felt like it was a movie that had these, like, I don't know, strict guidelines or perimeters around it. But I thought with those things in play, I thought it was pretty well done, pretty well executed. It's still like an exciting movie. There's a lot of action, but there are a lot of factors around it, given those perimeters, that I ultimately did not like, and I was highly disappointed. So, and I have to say I'm the odd man out, because everyone and their grandmother is, kind of creaming their pants over the new Predator movie. And I get the enthusiasm, I get the positive reviews, I get people saying that they really like it and all of these things, acknowledging that it's very, very different. And I really crave something new all the time, especially when it comes to established IPs like the Predator creature. That was, I think, the number one strength with Prey. But I have to say, at the end of the day, there are certain things about the movie that were really, really off-putting. And I'm a lone voice in saying that, because I have not, I don't think I've come across one negative review of the new film. Critics have been raving about it, and then all the YouTube folks that I watch have been really raving about it. They have acknowledged some of the things that could deter people from actually really liking this film, but they still said that even that, with those things being said, it was still a very successfully done film. But anyway, so check it out. I put it up. I'm really interested to see what people think. For what it's worth. I mean, what do I know? My taste is up my ass, but I do know I watch a shit ton of movies, and so it is what it is. So about a month ago, I covered all of these movies. There were how many movies altogether? I think there were, shit, I can't remember. I think there was four altogether. I got this amazing box set about a month ago. I was in Bangor. It's been about a month since I got any new movies, or I should say, since I've been to Bull Moose. I went to the Bull Moose in Bangor. Got some really killer movies, but I got this awesome box set that was put out by Severn, that of all of these films that I never seen before, and it's the Blood Island series, and just these amazing, super low budget horror exploitation movies, directed by Eddie Romero, who I went into this totally cold. did not know anything about this director. Didn't know anything about this kind of interesting, the history about these exploitation movies being made in the 60s and 70s and 80s in the Philippines. Very, very cool. I My favorite boutique label out there is Mondo Macabra. They're hands down my favorite, and I really love Severin. But the thing that's different with Mono Macabre, which has been a really cool thing, is they really have a deep focus on a lot of kind of Asian exploitation movies, a lot of Indonesian films, a lot of Japanese films. They do all kinds of other horror exploitation movies and total sleaze fest movies. But one of the things they do is they seem to focus on a lot of Asian exploitation movies. So, but I had never heard of these films, the Blood Island series, and I got this amazing box set. And Severin put this out. Severin is one of my favorite uh, labels. But the director of these films, Eddie Romero, pretty interesting guy. I mean, I um, never knew anything about him. He was a pretty prolific director in the Philippines in the like late 60s and 70s, and he made all of these like insanely terrible but amazing exploitation movies. And I just kind of wanted to do a little show talking about him. And really interesting because there was this whole like wave of creative people in the Philippines that were these filmmakers, and they were making these like incredibly low budget movies. Some of his stuff remind me of like Herschel Gordon Lewis, who is one of my favorite. Pretty. Well, my favorite horror exploitation director is Lucio Fulci. He's my man, and I would have to say shortly behind that would probably be Herschel Gordon Lewis. And I saw a lot of similarities because of the low budget nature, the total trash kind of aspect of the films. But Eddie Ramirez was unique because there's a lot of cool special features on this box set. And they were talking about how, he made a lot of trash, exploitation movies, and they're essentially kind of monster movies. But he really wanted, he started off as a writer, and he really wanted these films to be actually good, like actually, good stories, really well developed characters, and he painstakingly made these films as far as like, kind of the storylines and trying to focus on the characters, like character development, and doing something new and different. And it's really interesting, even though like on the surface it's all like really trashy and super low budget, and making and then him making these films for virtually no money, no resources, but so on the surface it's like total trash. But there actually is like, you could tell that he put a lot of care and tried to interject maybe a certain kind of degree of richness to the characters and to the story to like give them some like lasting power, even though it's like not really a thing. But you can tell that he really tried to to really do that. Like, I mean, Herschel Gordon Lewis didn't, like when I'm making those comparisons, like Herschel Gordon Lewis I think is a difference because he was in the business of making money and being an exploitation director and trying to capitalize on the success that he had, but then also other styles, other directors and other films that were popular. And he was a businessman, and he looked at it really about just like realizing that there's this niche of these exploitation maniacs like myself that love these trashy movies, and so he just wanted to milk it and to try to like capitalize it, make as much money as he possibly could. And I feel like that's pretty safe to say about like, and I think he obviously had a massive impact, and I think some of his films are actually just fantastic. But I think at the core, Herschel Gordon Lewis was a business guy, and that's kind of how his approach was. But I do think the difference with Romero is that he actually like really tried to tell a good story. He made that the focus, and you can kind of see that in his films, even though everything is so like insanely ridiculous and over the top and so low budget. So there's a difference, I think. Like he was a craftsman that way and trying to, and again, he didn't like always, he wasn't successful all the time, but you can tell he definitely tried really hard to make these films have a little bit of depth. And I noticed that with some of his films is that, again, totally trashy and ridiculous, but there's a certain level of detail, particularly around the characters, that you don't typically see in a Herschel Gordon Lewis movie or other exploitation directors. So very cool, very interesting. That was one of the things that really struck my interest about his work. Pretty extensive catalog of films that he was involved in. Um, Ganito Kami Noon Pan 19, which came out in '76. The Mad Doctor of Blood Island, of course, the classic that's included in the box set. The Mad Doctor of Blood Island from 1969. The Brides of Blood Island also included. The Brides of Blood Island that came out in 68. The Beast of Blood, another fabulous, fantastic movie. Beast Beast of Blood or Beast of the Dead, 1970. He also worked with Pam Grier, which is amazing. Pam Grier, of course, was like kind of the during the 60s, 70s, mostly the 70s, was known as like the queen of exploitation movies, black exploitation movies. Most the way I heard, like I remember seeing Pam Grier films, like exploitation movies, when I was a kid. I definitely saw a few of them, and I knew who she was. But then I kind of heard, with this period when I had kind of forgotten about her, and also Robert Forster, and when Quentin Tarantino directed and released Jackie Brown, he reintroduced both of those actors to the world all over again, and they were, especially Pam Grier, they were, in so many of those trash movies in the '70s and '80s and late '60s, and along with Robert Forster, really cool. But I mean, when she was really young, she was cranking them out. Black Mama, White Mama, '73. Aguila, 1980. Beast of the Yellow Night, 1971. A lot of these films, other than the Blood Island films or the box set, I have not seen any other of Eddie. I haven't seen any other films by Eddie Romero, but I definitely need to and want to, and my eyes will be on the lookout in my future travels. Savage Sisters in 1974. I mean, just so many. And he started off primarily as a writer, but then he transitioned into as a director. But as far as I know, from what I know about him, he wrote and directed pretty much every film he was involved in. The Twilight People in '72. Terror is a Man in 1959, just wild. The Wild Hunt in 73. Beyond Atlantis in 73. The Walls of Hell in 64. Manila Open City in 88. Or 68, sorry. The Return of Leda Gulf. The Return of Leda Gulf in 63. King and Emperor in 1967. Banta Rig Kampor 77. Cavalry Command. I mean, just crazy. Like, just so prolific. Cavalry Command came out in 58. Machete Maidens. Machete Maidens. What a title. In 2010, which was like one of his more recent films. That's wild. Only the Brave Know Hell from 65. Sudden Death in 77. Lost Battalion in 1960. White Force in 88. I mean, the list is endless. Like, just so many movies he was responsible for. A lot of these he just wrote, but then a lot of these he also directed. Ang Kame no Deos from 47. The Big Dollhouse, 71. The Passionate in 66. Faces of Love, 2007. Just wild. Really, really wild. So again, like I said, there's a lot of his films I have not seen. He passed away. He was born in 1924, and he passed away in 2013. In this box set that I got from Severin, there's some amazing interviews with him, and I think they were recorded maybe a few years before he passed away. But super interesting, super informative, and again, I think it's the main thing about learning about him was about, you know, his level of really wanting to still, you know, tell a good story. And again, it's, you know, it's not Shakespeare, but that was the thing that really stood out to me, was that he really tried his damnedest to like tell good stories. So very, very cool. I was, you know, part of the thing about exploring all of these movies, and then, you know, from the 60s, 70s, when I'm into a style or a film, I really love to kind of trace back the lineage, you know, especially when it comes to horror films. And, you know, being a massive fan of horror films that rely all on like practical effects. And so, and thankfully now, this day and age, 2025, I feel like most things, things, you know, come back around, or like kind of, there's this full circle thing that happens. I think we're seeing that in music and with film. And I think in regards to that, like definitely with like the use of practical effects, I'm seeing that more and more in horror films. Because people love that. There is so much CGI in virtually every film these days, and there are good examples of where it can be done very well, obviously, and or blended with practical effects. But there's something about that, you know, when you have this group of guys or girls that are just, you know, they have like couple $100, and they're trying to like figure out how to make a head explode, or how to like decapitate someone, and make it look as real as possible, but yet have fun doing it. And there's something about that, you know, Tom Savini being kind of the god of that, of practical effects. But one of the things with Eddie Romero's films is like, I mean, some of these films go back to the late 50s, and they were using copious amounts of gore. Some of these films were very gory, way ahead of their time, shooting these movies with no budget, and they were just going for it, and totally working outside of any kind of traditional movie system or Hollywood system, if you will. You know, truly like punk rockers in a lot of ways. And I just think that's really inspiring to kind of just make it happen and make it work, given, you know, all of these incredible amounts of roadblocks. But I definitely recommend anything with Eddie Romero. Definitely check out the Island, the Blood Island series is absolutely amazing. I mean, again, I just kind of learned about him over the last month or two, and I've seen a lot of these interviews because the box set is really packed with all these really cool interviews with him. And I have to say, like, definitely check him out. That's one of the things I love about diving into all this whole world. And a lot of the times now, when I go to buy movies, I buy a lot of movies that I've never seen, and this is the case of that. And I really struck gold. I mean, it's pretty rare that I have gotten films that, you know, when it comes to movies I don't like or couldn't really not I'm not really into. It's pretty rare that that happens, even though I'm like just buying stuff cold most of the time now. But that this is an example of why I kind of do that, because I'm discovering so much cool shit all the time, and it's super inspiring. But I would definitely say anything you see, you know, if you're into this, into trash cinema, into all these like super low budget exploitation movies, anything you see out there with Eddie Romero's name attached to it, I I think it's safe to say just snag it up, because it's some good shit. It's some fucking satisfying shit. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.